Welcome to Midlife Catalyst, a place where ordinary people share extraordinary stories. I am so grateful to bring to you part 2 of my conversation with Meg Teets from Sorta Awesome podcast and Gemini Wrongs on Substack. Meg is so well spoken and summarizes difficult and challenging events with such grace, dignity, and clarity. I do want to say we are sharing our lived experiences. Everyone experiences life differently. Take what you need from what's shared, apply it to your life and your situation, and it definitely may not be approached in the same manner. For me, as I know Meg alluded to as well, I absolutely loved my time in public education. I have best friends from every district I ever worked in. I have such great memories. What I'm sharing is not at all to disparage any profession, program, district, or entity. I always had a longing and a calling, as Elizabeth Gilbert puts it, a not this, which I have alluded to in my writing over and over and over again. I could find in my journaling, be it living a life in a certain city, a life of drinking, in a certain work situation, in a certain relationship. I have fond memories of all of those things, but there was the continual calling and the repeated patterns of not this. This is not what I want to be doing. I do hope I eventually find what the this is. I want to have peace and contentment. That's part of why I want to do this podcast, through using my voice and hearing other people's experiences with growth and change, that ultimately I can feed that urge and find the thing that I am most passionate about, to where it's a longing, not a career. It's something that I wake up every day thinking about and I spring out of bed wanting to do. For my family, that was education, and that was education for 40 years. But quite honestly, after 46 years of living that life, I was exhausted and ready for something else, as I know Meg was ready for something else after the passing of her mom, and to move on from Sorta Awesome. It's not that we both didn't value and love our time, relationships, and experiences with those situations. As we are continuously reminded, life is short. It goes by very quickly. I feel like I've lived 3 lives since 2017. I feel like the time from 2020 to 2025 has really been 25 years, not 5 years. The continual exposure we have to hard, bad things happening in society, such as the fires in LA and the tragedy in New Orleans, just reminds us you have to chase what it is that you're longing for, because it goes by so quickly. I hope you enjoy part 2 of our conversation, and thank you for listening to Midlife Catalyst.
Reminder, we pick up talking about personality types. You say it's like a love language. It's like a second language to me. I started years ago, probably when my girls were toddlers, at least 15 years ago. I started with Myers-Briggs because we were kind of at a place, especially after my husband left coaching. When my husband was coaching college football, we had a very functionally fine marriage because we never saw each other. And I mean never. Your dad was a coach, so you know the coaching life. Yes, exactly. So the coaching life, like that is life, is the ball game. And it's not just in season. That's what most people don't understand. It's off season. My husband, of course, being a college coach, was recruiting. We literally would see him for 2 weeks in the summer. And even during those 2 weeks in the summer, he was still making phone calls, all the things. Yes, we really did not know each other very well, although we started dating when I was a freshman in college. He was in football that whole time. In 2008, when he left coaching, we kind of had to restart our marriage in a lot of ways. We just didn't know each other. We had 2 kids at that point, but we just didn't really know each other. We didn't really understand each other. And I am a person who I love figuring out why people are the way they are. I want to figure out, first of all, why am I the way I am? That's the question I'll always be seeking the answer to.
Absolutely. That's always been
yes,
my draw. But then
yes,
I want to know
yes,
about other people too.
yes, exactly. If I can kind of like put some order on the chaos that is a person, I can be like, okay, that's why you do that. Started with Myers-Briggs. He would not take a test. This man is an INTJ. He's an Enneagram 5. He is
He
a
and I are the
Scorpio
same
moon.
people.
Yeah.
Like, we're the same person other than I'm a
Yes.
Virgo. But
Yeah. And he's a
that's
Leo. And I think you're an August Virgo, right? Okay.
Yep, I am.
So, yes. Once I figured out he's an INTJ and I'm an ENFP, I'm like, okay, I can figure out like, here's how our cognitive, because I went all the way in. Like I studied the different cognitive preferences that each of these types have, that we're all a little bit introverted, we're all a little bit extroverted, and all of these cognitive functions. I went all the way in. I could talk about that forever. And kind of matched up, like he's got, introverted intuition as his first cognitive function. And that means he loves to do a deep dive and gain all of the knowledge that he can and be singularly focused. Well, I have extroverted intuition as my first cognitive function. And that means I like to know a little tiny bit about everything. Just taking that and like working my way through all of these different expressions of personality and like how we deal with energy. Again, you were talking about the introvert thing. One of my dear friends, one of our mutual friends, Laura Tremaine, writer and podcaster, she's an introvert too. In discovering like, oh, but she's like this really outgoing, gregarious person who hosts parties and does all of this.
right.
It's like introverts can function in society, you guys. Like they do things. It's just about
we
energy.
need more time to recharge. Yes, I'm a huge proponent of energy management. I'm also very opposed to small talk. I want meaningful conversations.
Yes.
Which is probably sometimes hard for me, of even pleasantries. Like, let's start this podcast. I just dive right in as opposed to
Yeah. And when I would have guests on Sort of Awesome before we even started recording, I'd be like, so how are you? Like, what's the weather like? What you been up to today? Just like all this stuff, just to kind of like warm up the conversation. I'm sure my introverts were like, I'm here for a reason. Can we just hit record? On Sort of Awesome, one of my very dear friends, Lee Kramer, used to work in a space kind of doing some side Enneagram coaching. She came on Sort of Awesome for several episodes to explain Enneagram to us. And this was back in 2015 before anybody was really talking about Enneagram. Enneagram is different from Myers-Briggs in the sense that, so Myers-Briggs kind of focuses more on your like cognition, your brain, how you interact with energy, how you interact with the environment around you. But Enneagram looks at your inner motivations, your inner wounds, childhood pain, and how these inner motivations express themselves externally. She gave me like an Enneagram assessment, and I discovered through it the one type I didn't want to be, which was type 9. A peacemaker is, in fact, what my type is. I started applying that to people around me, to my husband, to our kids, to friendships. I was fortunate. Enneagram got really big in Christian circles. This is when I was a practicing Christian. So then, people were talking about Enneagram all the time, and I loved it. I still do. My big thing right now is definitely more astrology. And astrology is ancient. It's been around for millennia, and there's all different kinds of modalities of learning it and how you apply it. No surprise to anybody. I do love to look at astrology just in the sense that it's another key to unlock. I'm a Gemini moon, and Gemini moons are very, very reluctant to be vulnerable and trust other people. Like, we will be very friendly and welcome other people's emotions, but sharing our own emotion is a very difficult thing for us. I find it endlessly fascinating. My weird party trick is, once I know any of your personality things, I will remember it forever. I have had people, I'm talking casual acquaintances that I just briefly had a conversation with them about. I've had people text me and be like, hey, I'm at a dinner party and we're talking Myers-Briggs. I can't remember my type. Do you remember what it is? And I'm like, oh yeah, you're an ISFP. Yeah. Like, I just remember it because it's like so important to me and helps me understand people so much.
Right. Well,
so you're INTJ, is that right? And are you an Enneagram 5 as well?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Hey, that is so fascinating.
To the point that I have to be like, okay, stop just doing your 5 and actually go visit with people. stop learning more, and go apply your knowledge or go out and socialize. I've always been fascinated with it. Background in psychology, and I've always tried to understand, why do I act like I do? Make sense of the world. For me, I was an only child, and we grew up in the small town in the country. I really didn't have close neighbors. It's always been a nature versus nurture thing for me of, am I a 5 and an introvert because I didn't have exposure to anyone else growing up? I had to go play by myself, play school, pretend, and do all these things. Or was I just born that way? I'm always contemplating, because you are very social. You had 4 kids. Now you have 5. Well, that fits your personality, as does my life. So it's interesting to me. But then as I got more into leadership, of helping my team understand, not just students. I mean, I think educators are great at understanding students, but understanding the adults you interact with, regardless of the organization. And as the leader, filling in those gaps. I did a lot of the table group work with Pat Linconi. Working Genius, helping people figure out, here's where for me as a hiring agent, I've got to go find someone to fill my deficit. I've got to ensure that we have a well-rounded team to reach the goals we want to reach. It's been really important to me. I do a lot of training with organizations on, do your employees know themselves? Because that's first. You need to know yourself and how you're going to show up in the world. But do you, as the leader, know your employees to know, this is why we're having conflict? This is why they're not getting this task done. This is where we need to implement some training or hire in a different capacity.
So many applications in the workplace. When we were still in Oklahoma City, I got to do an Enneagram training. Their HR approached me and I was like, now listen, I need y'all to know, I am an enthusiast and I know a lot about it, but I am in no way an expert. And they're like, no, it's fine. My oldest is a psychology major at FSU. And what she wants to do eventually is be, a psychologist. There's a certain part of psychology, and I cannot remember the name of it, but it's basically the kind of psychologist that goes in and does work in the corporate environment, helping people with their teams, with how their corporate culture is set up, and helping them to, align it with their values. That's her interest. I have to wonder, speaking of nature versus nurture, is it because she's grown up with a mom who's like, that's your Enneagram 1 coming through, or that's a very Aquarius thing to say. So
industrial organizational psychology.
That's it. Yes, that's the one. That's what she wants to go into.
Yes. I was a psych major. I have a master's in clinical psychology, and people 30 years ago laughed in my face of, this is a worthless degree. What are you doing with it? Now I think it's one of the most sought after beneficial degrees in America, because that's the true key of an organization, of really any HR department now, the shift of terminology and employee well-being. Let's talk a little bit about Substack, because, I'm obsessed with Substack and your writing and what you're hoping to bring with that platform.
I'm being so genuine when I say this. I have to give credit to you, seeing you just dive in and start writing and just start where you were and really make a go on Substack. I had opened a Substack. This is so silly.
Well, I'm like, don't give me that much credit. I had the damn platform built 2 years ago before I had the courage.
Well, when I very first started this Substack, I did have the foresight, knowing my Gemini self and knowing that I would definitely change my mind and my focus down the road. I did have the foresight to be just megteets.substack.com because I knew I would change. But when I very first started it, it was during Taylor Swift, the Eras tour. And I had all these big plans. I was going to do chronicle, what people are wearing and information about the different venues. That was too overwhelming to begin with. I did go to the Eras tour in Arlington. I loved it. It was the 3rd stop on the tour. And after I went, I was just like, I'm done with this. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I had my URL on Substack. After we left Oklahoma, I was like, maybe I'll start writing again. So I kind of made a few stops and starts with it. But I will say, it was when you got on there and started publishing newsletters and talking about your podcast and kind of catching people up with where you've been and what your journey has been like, I was like, hey, like I have this Substack. I know Amanda's in there doing it and I want to kind of do it too. And I saw that you were like really actively engaging with the platform. And that was a thing that I had not done. I got so in my head about it. I was like, this is a place for journalists and professional writers. And I just want to just blog. Like it was like, that was my start of online work. It was in 2006. I started a mommy blog and it grew to have an audience and I loved it. And then I was like, but I kind of just want to treat it like it's a blog again. And it was through reading your newsletters on the Substack app that I started kind of poking around again. And I was like, well, maybe there is space and freedom to just, am not trying to write a book. I know you are. And I know lots of people on there are really looking at this from building an audience for publication. That's not my interest. I just have a lot of words. And now that I don't have the podcast to get on there for an hour a week, every single week and talk, I'm just like, I think I can bottle up that energy and really make a go of it. Just write whatever I want to, because who cares? I don't have like a broader goal. I just have a lot of thoughts to share. And Substack is a great place to do it. Something I didn't even really touch on is by the time Sort of Awesome came to a close, oh my gosh, Amanda, I was so burned out on social media in general. I had done it for so long as part of my job. I heard a woman on a different podcast about a year ago who had been an online content creator for like a decade. She left the internet altogether, just like dropped off, closed everything, just went dark. And she had come back to do an interview with somebody for their podcast about leaving the internet. And she said something along the lines of just like being so burned out with, she used the phrase, harvesting my personal life for content. And I was like, oh my God, somebody finally put words to how I felt. Sometimes I felt like I was just doing things in my life and taking pictures of my life and sharing things from my life. And I wasn't even living it. I was just doing it so I would have content. Me, my personality, I had to go all the way away. I didn't post on Instagram. I barely said anything on Facebook. We do still have a Facebook group community for the podcast. And so I would pop in there every now and again, but I just had to go all the way away from social media. It's been really liberating. I don't feel those weird attachments to it anymore. All of that to say, to bring it back to Substack, I have found, especially again, since I started reading your Substack and kind of getting back into it, you and I've even talked about this, off mic.
Yes.
That there are things about Substack that are a little frustrating and can be a little intimidating. If I just go with it at the mindset of just having fun, just put stuff out there, maybe people respond, maybe they don't. It's kind of also scratching that social media itch for me a little bit. So I've been having fun with it for sure.
We have talked about that because I justify Substack and LinkedIn because they're professional scrolling.
Right.
Enhancing my mind or connecting professionally, even though I can go down just as dark, if not for me, darker, really a comparison hole.
Yes.
That I want
it's
to
so
avoid.
easy.
Because there are well-established, like New York Times bestsellers on
I was going to say like
that you're like, okay.
Like household name.
People. Yes.
It's been a good exercise for me in just getting over myself and just being like, who cares? Like I saw somebody say on TikTok the other day, they're like, who cares? We're all worm dirt anyway. I was like, ultimately,
right.
We're worm dirt.
And for me, the benefits really have outweighed, just the connections with people that I have made through opening up and putting myself out there has been great, if nothing else. And getting those words out, as you say.
Yeah.
As the introvert, it was the safe way to get words out before moving to this platform.
I can absolutely see that. I even just decided to stop overthinking what I was going to name it. I was talking to my now 17-year-old. She and I both absolutely love Steve Lacy, the music artist. One of my favorite albums of the 2020s is his album, Gemini Writes. He's a Gemini too, obviously, and he sings about it a lot. So he works it into a lot of his lyrics. And I was like, I'm so mad that Steve Lacy stole that name, or he created that name, honestly, because it's like the perfect name. And she was like, well, what about Gemini Wrongs? And I was like, okay, yes, that's it.
I am obsessed with my music, although not a Swiftie, but what are some of your favorite songs and artists? You know how I have my top 5 artists or
Yes.
top couple of
Yeah.
songs. Who would
Yeah.
that be for you?
I am so weirdly eclectic. I do really enjoy Taylor Swift's music. I am definitely a like folklore evermore girly. Those are the albums she dropped during the pandemic that are a lot more singer-songwritery. And I know it is like trite to say, but she's a really good songwriter. But in a lot of ways, she really is a good songwriter. And I really like those albums a lot. Are you familiar with Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats?
Yes.
Okay. I'm obsessed with Nate Rateliff. Like he would be alarmed. He knew the depth of how much I have listened to his music, thought about his lyrics. I did get to see him live in Oklahoma City. It was like a month after my mom died in Oklahoma City. It was one of the best nights of my life. I loved it so much. Love Nate Rateliff. So his is very like Southern rock, singer-songwritery. It's kind of hard to put him into a genre. I really like Nate Rateliff a lot. I also really like SZA. I don't even know how you classify it, R&B scene. I think that she is an incredible lyricist, and I listen to her music a lot. It's funny because a lot of the music, the younger music that I listen to, my girls have introduced me to. Everyone in my family, every one of us, my husband and I, all of our kids are very, very, very into music. So we introduce music to each other. We're always have music going. I know some families or people, they just don't listen to music that much. I'm like, how do you live?
Right.
Music is a huge part of just my day-to-day life and how I process feelings. And I love music
it's
a lot.
huge.
Yeah. So those are some of the big ones. Those are 3 that I'm into a lot right now. Who knows? Next year, it might be somebody totally different. I'm kind of into Kendrick Lamar right now, too. So who knows where it'll go.
Yeah. Well, get ready for the Super Bowl.
Yeah, totally.
I tend to go more towards the actual lyrics and the words. So I do understand the Taylor Swift appeal. It also floors me when people have no idea what a song is talking about. And I'm just
I don't understand that either.
I don't get it.
No.
I don't.
I have to have the lyrics. In fact, when I listen to a new album, I will pull up genius.com. I will listen to the album like pretty much straight through and look at all the annotations and the insights, and I will look things up. I love genius.com because other fans will put in like, oh, you can go to this interview this artist did at this time and they're talking about the story behind this. Like you can fully deep dive on a song or even just a lyric within a song, a story behind a song. I'm like, what else are we doing if we're not finding the meaning in the lyrics? So
favorite books. You have great recommendations.
I'll tell you a classic book for me and a recent book that were really impactful. I read a lot of nonfiction, a lot. Like if I'm going to read a book, especially like in print, like sit down and read a book, it's probably nonfiction. I like fiction, but I usually listen to that on audio and it's just kind of for entertainment. I'm not like the readers who are like, I read this really powerful novel and it really, I mean, I appreciate that. I have a degree in English. So, I mean, I do appreciate that literature has the capacity to change our worldview. I get it. I don't know. If I'm going to read something serious, I usually read nonfiction. A book that I read many years ago that I think anybody who is creative should read is written by Madeleine L'Engle, who most of us know for writing A Wrinkle in Time. She wrote a number of other books as well, but she has a nonfiction book called Walking on Water. I will say it is religious in the sense that Madeleine L'Engle was a Christian, but it is the kind of like spiritually Christian, kind of like Father Richard Rohr. You can read it and sub in the universe if you want to, if you're not comfortable using the idea of God. But Walking on Water essentially is her exploration of the life of the artist. The thing that stood out to me the most was she talks about the figure of Mary and how God came to Mary with a story, essentially, and asked Mary to give flesh to the story. And that just stuck with me all of these years. The idea that the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, brings to each of us ideas or stories to tell, things to say, messages, and entrusts those things to us, and that we get to decide Will we say yes to giving flesh to it, or will we let the idea pass by and then the idea goes to someone else who gives flesh to it? I love it. She talks a lot about we all believe in magic when we're children, but we lose that sense of wonder. It's really great. She wrote it many years ago. It totally stands the test of time as far as I can remember. Walking on Water, Madeline L'Engle. I think anyone who's a creator should read that book at least once. The other one is a book called Unreasonable Hospitality. It's written by Will Guadera, I believe is his last name. I have it on my nightstand right now. And he's in the restaurant industry. I found this book because of the bear. I hadn't heard of it otherwise. I'm not in the restaurant industry. That's how I came across this book. But he talks about the idea of unreasonable hospitality, like how we create hospitality that makes a person feel really honored and really seen and really cared for. It's such an interesting read. If you do find restaurants and that kind of industry interesting, it is interesting to read. But the overall heart of the book can be applied to anybody, any of us who ever invite someone over for coffee or invite someone to stay the weekend, or even outside of your own home, having that spirit of hospitality to where you are really clear on it, holding it as a value to make the people around you feel important and taken care of. And it's a quick read. I really liked it. I was trying to think because I knew this was going to be one of the questions, and then I started to spin out, and I was like, "Oh my God, what have I read?" What? Because I read a lot of romance too, so that's not really going to be a big change your life book.
For some people, it is. I love how you said when you have something in a hard print. If I'm reading nonfiction, I need the book. I need to mark it up. I will read fiction or something lighter on my Kindle. I don't do audiobooks. I am so rigid with classifying how I read. It's bizarre, I'm sure. And as I've been moving a lot, it's like you really need to use the Kindle. But I need my sticky notes and I need my tabs and I need to mark it up.
Yes. I'm the same way because in Kindle, you can highlight things. I never go back and look at those highlights. But if I have a book that I have marked up and I've put the Post-it notes in the margin and all of that, then I actually will flip back through it and be like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot about this.
You do still have a podcast with your husband?
Yeah. So during the pandemic, when everyone was just, unhinged, none of us knew what was going on. We started a podcast called Awesome Today. During the pandemic, we did new episodes daily, which was a huge stretch for me as a podcaster. He taught himself again in year 5. He was like, I'll just teach myself how to do it. So he did like all the production side on that, which was hugely helpful because I was still running sort of Awesome every single week. But then as life kind of returned to normal, we eventually switched back to doing it on a weekly basis. So it comes out every Monday, and it's literally just the true definition of audio wallpaper. Like you just put it on in the background. It is nothing serious. We sometimes talk about current events, or we'll tell goofy stories from our lives, or I'll find a really interesting Reddit thread and I'll read it to him and get his reaction. It's just silly, goofy stuff. It's called Awesome Today, and it comes out every Monday.
That's great. You talk a lot about cooking. That seems to be another passion of yours.
We both talk a lot about cooking. It's funny because for a long time, especially when Kai was coaching and I had little kids, I just made toddler food all the time. He was never home to eat it anyway. When he left coaching, though, he really took up cooking as a hobby. Like some guys hunt and some guys play golf. My husband likes cooking, and that's what he's been doing for a long time. It wasn't really something that I was interested in. But I will say, having closed the podcast and not really having like a real hobby or anything, I've gotten really into like baking and trying new recipes. That's the thing. Like he's pretty steady. He's a Taurus rising. Taurus is like the steady energy, the bull, kind of slow to change. So he kind of has his repertoire that he likes to cook from. And I, being the Gemini, I'm like, I want to try everything, all these different recipes. I never make the same thing twice, basically. So we do talk a lot about cooking. It is a shared hobby for us now. A lot of times we'll talk about different recipes we tried, how they turned out. Yeah.
So my other stock question, which I've been following your Substack, or maybe you guys talked about it on your podcast, of cutting back on coffee. And I'm like, why are all these people shaming me on cutting back on the coffee? I know it fuels my anxiety. I know it makes me like by 3 p.m. go off the rails, but especially right now when it's 10 degrees outside, I need my coffee. So,
Yes.
how do you take your coffee?
Okay. I drink my coffee black, and I started drinking my coffee black because a long time ago, before I started teaching many years ago, I was a Starbucks barista. I don't know how they do it now. This was over 20 years ago. You had to go through this training and like learn like the correct way to drink coffee and how to find notes. And you had to drink the coffee black during training. They don't care what you do with your life after that. They really taught you how to identify, different types of coffee. But when I worked at Starbucks, I started drinking my coffee black. And now for the most part, that's just how I prefer it. I've been doing it so long. We don't just drink regular coffee. We drink like, what's the Cuban brand? It's like espresso, and we make it in the mocha pot. It's not like a couple of Keurig cups of coffee a day. It's high intensity, high fuel stuff. And we were drinking 1 to 2 cups in the morning. I would usually have one Cafe Bustelo. My brain just remembered it. Cafe Bustelo. I would usually have one early afternoon to get me through till dinner. And then we would sit and have a cup after dinner. And I wrote this in my Substack, but truly for a long time, I was like, gosh, I have so many problems with anxiety, and I just feel so jittery and nervous. We didn't have like a big come to Jesus, like we got to stop drinking coffee. We just kind of naturally just sort of didn't drink as much coffee anymore. But I do still like to have a little pick me up. So I have gotten really into black tea as a caffeine alternative. And I really thought I hated tea. I just couldn't find the right tea. I just need a little splash of half and half to take the edge off of the tea taste.
I'm really trying. I'm trying with the tea. I'm going to try integrating decaf in a few weeks. I've got to have one vice. Everything else I had to give up. I got to have one.
Well, even if you can just like be like, okay, when the weather thaws, then I'll get serious about less coffee. Yes. I think that's a very reasonable goal.
We'll stick with that. Yes. Do you have a go-to quote or someone you go to for quotes?
I am definitely a person who will just look up a quote for something that I'm thinking about and kind of jot those down. This is kind of weird and esoteric. There's a spiritual teacher from the 20th century, and his name's Neville Goddard, or was. He died. He was a person who grew up like sort of Christian-y, and then had like a spiritual teacher who kind of taught him the Jewish Kabbalah, which is like sort of esoteric Judaism. Anyway, he had some really interesting ideas about the Bible as a psychological drama instead of like sacred scripture that really happened, that the different characters in the Bible represent mankind in different phases of awakening to spiritual truth. I told you this was really weird and esoteric, but I've read a lot of Neville Goddard, not only his books, which are very short and easy to read. One of them that comes to mind is The Power of Consciousness. I've listened to a lot of his lectures because he was sort of like a mid-20th century writer. So there's recordings of his lectures and stuff. His take on the idea of Jesus saying the kingdom of heaven is within, that particular quote, even though it is from scripture, that is one that has been really radical in my life, to recognize that, I grew up my whole life as a practicing Christian thinking about heaven as being like up there or when you die, and that you can take this one part of this thing that Jesus said when he was on this planet, if you believe that Jesus was a person, and this idea that you can go within and you can create and find and discover heaven within, is probably the most life-changing quote for me.
That's super powerful.
Yeah.
I had no idea at the time that it was part of the gospel, but the quote, if you do not bring forth what is within you, basically it will kill you. Yeah. But if you bring forth what is within you, then you will find that sense of peace. And
so true.
I misquoted that, but kind of the same gist of what is within you can either catapult you to a new way of being, or it's going to destroy you.
Yeah, for me, like sort of like in this weirdly like post-Christian life, like it's weird because a lot of people who deconstruct from Christianity have like a lot of bitterness or religious trauma or bad feelings about Christianity specifically, or religion in general. And I genuinely don't. I can sit here and say I don't. I worked through a lot of those feelings in years past. But at this point, I don't need religion in terms of how I connect with God. But having now moved into that sort of mindset, I can go back and look at scripture with no baggage attached to it and just be like, wow, there's really actually some incredible truths about humanity, about relationships, about how we love each other, what we're here for. That, if you can isolate it in a way that doesn't bring up baggage, if you have it, which not all of us do,
Right.
it's really amazing.
Yes, I've come full circle in some understandings that way. You talked earlier about values. Do you have core values identified?
And I listened in your most recent podcast episode as you guys talked about values and living your life in alignment with values. The older I get, the more important authenticity is for real. I have struggled with that. Honestly, that was kind of part of Closing Sorta Awesome too, is I had begun to grow into a person that I wasn't entirely sure the audience would jive with. Specifically, not practicing Christianity anymore is like probably the biggest part of that. That was the most radical change for me. I know I didn't feel like I could authentically show up for them in that way anymore. And I also wasn't 100% sure that I could trust the audience at large with that, because it was still a very new and kind of tender thing. Not to say, again, my audience has never been anything but incredible, but it was like kind of my own thing. They don't know this person that I've become. Authenticity is huge. And I don't yet know if this is a value or just a priority, but learning and trusting my intuition, acting on it, only making choices that are in alignment, that feel intuitively correct, is probably the biggest thing. I'm working really hard to teach that to my kids, because I grew up in a religious context of you should pray about it, or, what does the Holy Spirit say? There's parts of Christianity that think that you cannot trust your heart or your intuition. And I want my kids to be able to do that, even when they make decisions that are very difficult for me, because that's not the decision I would make. But they're like, I just feel in my heart, like I just know this is what I'm supposed to do, or I'm not supposed to do this. I'm like, okay, I may not have chosen that, but I do affirm that you are listening to your intuition. I don't know if that's really a value, but it is absolutely a priority
I think
for me.
it's an operating principle as I am in this lifelong quest to understand myself. That's why I ask about values, because I'm interested, in how other people operate or see themselves. A friend of mine and I would always talk about relating it to the Sunday scaries. People having that in the pit of their stomach. I don't want to go to work. Well, you want to know why? A lot of times it's because you're putting yourself in a situation or a place that is out of alignment with your values. You may not know that, but that's deep down. There is a conflict there with who you are. And you either have to come to a reckoning of that and do something about it internally, speak up and address it with the operation or whatever your level of employment, or you've got to go do something else. Or again, it's going to kill you. Authenticity is one of my values as well. But intuition, I wrote about this. It's scary how much of the time it is spot on. Someone texted me just a few days ago, "You are always right." And I'm like, well, I wish I would actually listen to myself. It's following that, because sometimes I feel like, oh no, my head knows, or I can control this scenario. But deep down, intuition for me is 99% right. And I need to follow and listen to that more.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to throw this out there too, as somebody who's been married to an INTJ for a long time and have other INTJ friends. I would affirm INTJs and INFJs have the most spot on intuition. Like I always call it Kyle's spidey sense. When he knows something intuitively, whether it's about a situation or a person, I can't think that he's ever been wrong. And so I think that just to affirm for you, because you do have that introverted intuition, like your intuition is pretty much, it's correct. So follow it. I know.
It takes practice, and it's not what you're supposed to do, but it is usually what is going to alleviate a lot of trouble.
This has been so fun. I love being back on microphone again. This has been so fun, and I am so thrilled that you're doing it. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of learning to teach. Another thing we have in common is that neither of us have any training or like formal learning in how to get on here and do all of this. And I told you this after I listened to your very first release that was just you talking. I know So much work went into that. It's been a thrill to see you grow and coming at it from like, okay, how does any of this work to now you're learning the ropes and you're creating all of these things that are the easier something is to experience as the audience, that I promise you that the more work has gone into it. I'm so excited to see where this goes.
I really appreciate it. Speaking of midlife, we talked about my backdrop, and I was looking for their stock images within the platform I use.
Yeah.
So I entered midlife because that is, of course, what we're
Okay.
talking about.
Yes.
The photos and the pictures associated with midlife were what, in my mind, 20 years from now. I'm like, this
Yeah.
is like 70. This is what you think of midlife. This is not how I see myself or how any of my friends look. It looks
Oh,
more like how my mom
like
looked at
Golden Girls
70.
era.
Yes. Yeah, I'm so trying to change the narrative around
Yes.
that
Yes.
because that's what I do. Also, staying relevant for me. I don't know the next layers of work and what all that will look like, but I know these skills equate to the current job market. And
Yes.
it's part of those things of seeing, no one's going to hire you after 48. You're irrelevant. You're silent, all of those things. But when we keep learning and staying relevant and up to date, showing people, we don't fit those images. That's not midlife.
No.
So let's
No.
get some different images out there.
Yes. Amen. 100%. Yes. Totally agree.
Your work, which can be found at megteets.substack.com, Gemini
Yeah.
Wrongs,
Yep.
and the Sorta Awesome community.
Yeah.
Thank you. And
Thank you
go
again.
enjoy the sun. A couple of takeaways I had in my conversation with Meg were really two things. One, I found it so profound, her ability to express what it meant to be at her mother's bedside as she passed. I too have some of those memories and feelings. A few days before my mom died, we were sitting at her bed. We had hospice come in. One of the things that will never leave me is I think it's one of those questions they're maybe prompted to ask because there is a lot of research on people at the end of their life and at their deathbed. They talk about their regrets. Daniel Pink has a great book. The Midnight Library is another fiction version of Living with Regrets. It struck me so deeply that my mom said, I have lived a great life. I've gotten to do everything I wanted to do. There's nothing more I could get out of this or ask for. Even to today, still, I could not say that. I definitely knew at the time I couldn't say that. It really was a big why behind my sobriety journey. But even before that, I had started to have questions on sobriety, on a career, and just her putting it that she didn't have those urging needs on her deathbed left me going, what are you going to do to be able to say the same thing when it's your time? Obviously, we have no control, but for as much as you can, what are you going to do to change and start living into a life that leaves you fulfilled, that leaves you going, I've done everything I've wanted to do? It's a great way to journal through and reach the point of your why. If you're struggling, if you're looking for purpose, if you're looking for what are they going to write about me in my obituary, have some deep reflection around that. That was in 2019, and I still think about it and I still write about it. The second thing that Meg talked about was how her move to Florida, going to the beach and her walks each night. She really views that as taking her mom with her along for the ride, not as, I wish she could have seen this, but she's coming with me. I really hadn't felt that way ever post-death until this past August. I went to Boston for the first time, amazing city. And it was a place on my very first evening, on my very first walk through Boston Common, I felt my mom with me. The flowers, the swans, the duck, all of the beauty of the city. It's a place neither of my parents got to visit. And my dad absolutely wanted to go to Fenway. Both of my parents would have loved that city. And I felt like it was the first trip I'd taken where I took them with me. I sat on the Green Monster and had the most amazing time at a Red Sox game and felt I was giving that to my dad. But being present on the walk and appreciating the flowers and the beauty of Boston, the antique stores, the history. My dad was a history teacher. It was one of the more fulfilling trips. I went by myself and I shared that with them. I honestly would encourage anyone to do that if people in your life have passed. Don't regret that they didn't get to see the beauty. Take them with you. Part of my reason in sharing my experiences and bringing other people's stories to you is that no one told me these things. There are a lot of books written on parenting, life, and development, but really understanding death, processing regret, how to live in the moment, how to be present, how to follow your intuition, how to follow what you want in life, what's calling to you. It's the hard conversations that people don't want to have, and I'm willing to have them, and I'm willing to share them because my purpose and my hope is that if one person takes my experience, takes Meg's experience, and can apply that to their life and feel empowered to do things differently, to make changes before it's too late, to be able to appreciate the people in their life, to be able to be present and fully in tune to the people in their life. I hope you take that and do it. It isn't a feel sorry for me. It isn't a this is so sad, I don't want to hear about it. People, this is life. This is reality. You want reality? This is it. This is what hits you. And if you don't accept it, then you're living in a fantasy world because we're all going to go through it. You have the opportunity to grasp control of your life and make those changes. I'm embracing technology and how it can help us. AI can do a lot, but it can't write your life story. Own your narrative. Step into the great awakening of midlife. Thank you to Meg Teets for giving her time. Thank you for joining Midlife Catalyst, a place where ordinary people share extraordinary stories.